All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's end the week. I see.
Obviously, we can say that.
First, I'd like to offer my condolences to Kenzie and anyone else that rooted against the Browns yesterday, but I can't because that would be a lie. So there's no condolences at all. And I'd like to offer my condolences in advance to Seth, and I don't know if there's any other diehard Steelers fans out there, but we'll start the trash talk
No,
early.
Jonathan Mitchell.
Mitchell.
Big Steelers
Game's
fan.
still 10 days away, but we'll start trash talking now.
Yeah.
See if we can beat them with our backups. Like, we didn't
With
even
our practice squad.
we didn't even need our coach last year, did we?
We beat him without a coach last year. We can beat him with a practice squad. Hopefully Chubbers will be back though.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Who's gonna win next week, Jonathan? Steelers or Browns?
We beat the Broncos with a practice
Call with
squad.
Jonathan. Who's gonna win?
We've been wearing practicing for it.
Who's gonna win? Steelers or Browns?
Brown.
Next week.
Oh, Brown.
Football. Cleveland or Pittsburgh? Oh, yes.
I don't like football. I don't watch it.
All right, here we go. There is your United States, right before the turn of the century, not the past century, but turn of the 19th to 20th century. We talked about the seeming need for unions, and I think we all kind of agreed that these people needed someone speaking for them. With all the long hours and child labor and horrible conditions and the inability of a person in that situation that's going to have any influence or power speaking to the, what do you call those people, like the big wigs, right? Those people at the top, how they're not going to have any influence. So they felt the need to unite. But the problem for them was whenever they tried to do that, it turned into violence. So the American people in general, even though most of them weren't rich, they looked at that and they're like, oh no, we can't support that. Look at 7 policemen die. We can't support activity like that. So the unions didn't really take off like they had hoped in this period we call the Gilded Age. This guy, Eugene V. Debs, becomes a major player in American politics over the next 30 years after the Pullman strike. Then we talked about populism and that strange election of 1896 kind of reminded us of 2020. One candidate at home, the other candidate, big crowds, and the other candidate won. McKinley didn't really have to go out and do a lot of campaigning. He had other people doing it for him, and he had the backing of business. As a Republican, he had the backing of all those business owners and, quite frankly, workers who, if they weren't destitute, if you were working and you were able to buy these new things like sewing machines, all these new innovations, if you were able to have a job and you lived in a city and you weren't one of those that were really destitute, like your 12-year-old had to go work, right? You would probably favor the Republicans because you had a job. That's the reason your family left the South, to have a job and be able to enjoy the city life. So McKinley had all that going for him. You had William Jennings Bryan out there, Scott, one of the greatest orators, political orators in American history. Very, very popular. His whistle stop campaigns, hundreds, if not thousands of people stopping at the station to see him speak. Very popular in the South. He won every state, but couldn't overcome the business of the Republicans. Then we talked about the city life and how, is this where we left off? The city life and how cities were growing and growing and growing quickly at twice the speed of all the other places in the country. And how nice it would be to be able to go to work and then actually have a little free time. Think about it. If you're a farmer, isn't that like your life, right? Farming is like, that's like your whole life. wake up early in the morning, you do whatever it is, the chores you gotta do. You might get some breaks throughout the day, but you're still on the farm, right? In the city, you can actually go home. You can go away from the place that you work. Even if it's only for a few hours, you get relaxation. Or you might be able to enjoy the nightlife, right? You got lights, you got hot and cold water, streetcars. But along with that good stuff comes some bad stuff, like crime, disease, pollution, areas of the country or the city that where these destitute, low-wage workers are living in slums, and even infant mortality. Infant mortality throughout history has been a major problem. If you don't know what infant mortality is, that is when babies are born and they don't make it through childbirth, or they barely make it through childbirth, and they don't live very much long after that, or sometimes the mother didn't make it through childhood. Unfortunately, that was a much more prevalent thing back then. Today, it's not so prevalent. It's very rare, actually, right? In our society, it's very rare, although I don't know if you know, but in the last couple of years, the Heartland families kind of, you might not know the situations, but people that have family here at Heartland had to go through babies not making it to full term, or not making it much past birth. But on page 369, in what would be your textbook, it says this: to those who live there, where in the cities, the gilded metropolis, as one one-eyed farm boy described the town of Kansas City as a tinsel town, there was an ugly side to urbanization. The squalor of slums, the rise of crime and prostitution, the dangers of disease. In fact, the infant mortality rate in the city was double that in the country. Get this. In 1880 Chicago, half the children born there lived past their 5th birthday. Half made it past their 5th birthday. Not everywhere, but in Chicago in the 1880s. Imagine how devastating that would be, right? So you got city life, which offers a lot of positive, but then you got the negative. And I think we left off yesterday with, if you've seen it before, and I probably should put a picture up, there's pictures you can find of the city of Pittsburgh in the 1940s, where it's daylight, like middle of the afternoon, and it looks like it's nighttime because of the pollution, the smoke and the soot filling the air, and the sun's light can barely penetrate. Plus, you had new immigration. You had these people moving from the south to the cities. You had birth rates going up, even with the infant mortality in some places like Chicago. And then you've got new immigration, not just English, German, not just people from northwestern Europe coming to America. You've got a huge influx of people from South and Southeast Europe coming to America in the 1880s and 1890s into the 1900s. Italians, Greeks, Russians, Polish, Scandinavians. Out west, you had more Chinese coming from China to ports in California. And America got this nickname as the melting pot. You heard of that before, right, Trey? Trey, I just realized you were Mrs. Coy's nephew. I didn't know that until yesterday. How I didn't realize that. Wait, what? Trey. I just asked her that yesterday. We were talking about it. Trey Jones, you're not Mrs. Coy's nephew.
Yeah.
Oh. Is there another Trey Jones in the lower grades? Weird. Okay. That was awkward.
And it's on video.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So this idea of a melting pot, the immigrants that were coming to America with hopes of finding a new life, a better life, this idea of the American dream. They'd be able to have a job and maybe even buy a piece of property, because America is built on the idea of freedom involves owning your own piece of property. But the people that were coming, and why it became a melting pot, is because if you're coming from Italy, sure, you might still speak Italian at home, but guess what you're going to do? You're going to make sure you do. You're going to make sure you learn English. You're going to make sure you learn English as best as you can, because there's a word that starts with A. You want to make sure when you go to this place, this land of what you're hoping is great prosperity for your family, you want to into the culture. Long word. Starts with A, ends with 8. Assimilate. I should have called someone that had their hand up. Yes. You want to assimilate into the culture. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? So when you go into America 100 some years ago, you want to make sure. Look, you can imagine parents telling their kids, "Okay, you just do what the other. You just want to assimilate into the culture. You don't want to be ostracized. You don't want to be seen as different. So you're going to do everything you can to learn English. You're going to learn the American way." That's the beauty of America. We mentioned yesterday, we're all products of immigration, right? But the beauty of it was that the people that came melted into this American way of life. They didn't come here and try to maintain their own culture. They came here to assimilate into American culture. That was the whole point. They didn't come here with any ill intentions about America. They didn't come here to transform the United States of America. So we became this melting pot, and it worked. Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's always the hope, right? We know it's not true. We know that it's not perfect, but they were certainly willing to do that. And by the way, the immigration was. What's the difference between then and now? Why is there so much hoopla then? If I'm talking so positively about this great thing called immigration that allowed America to grow in the most prosperous nation in world history, why is it such a negative topic today? What's the difference? It's called legal, right? The legality of it. People that were coming to America were all coming to a certain place from Europe. They were coming into New York Harbor at a place called Ellis Island. They were coming at great rates. And waiting for them there in the harbor was a statue. And that statue, this goes right in there. Look, I hole punched it for you. You can put it right in the middle of your Gilded Age notes. They were coming and being met by Lady Liberty. And did I read this yesterday to you? Did we read this?
I remember.
Give me your tie. Oh, I didn't hold my sleeves. I forgot to scroll.
I'm really hungry. You enjoy that, right?
I'll try it. Oh my gosh. Oh, I have the. Did you study for? I did actually on the weekend.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse. We got two. Did you get one here? The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. That doesn't sound very positive, does it? Wretched refuse. In other words, what America was saying at this time was, hey, rest of the world, all ye people, citizens of the world, if you are down and out in your home country, if you are destitute, if you are homeless, if you are castaways from wherever you're at, come here to the land of liberty. She stands at the door with the golden lamp, lighting the way to liberty. Immigration is who we are. That's how we became what we are. There should be no, don't get lost in this fight, in the current fight about immigration, and get dragged down into thinking that immigration is necessarily a bad thing. The battle isn't about immigration. Some people will just keep trying to pin you down saying you're against immigration if you happen to be against illegal immigration. Don't let them do that to you. Talk loftily about how awesome it is that America is a land of immigrants, that's how we became who we are. We're not, you shouldn't be, I hope you're not, anti-immigrant. That would be kind of hypocritical and not very loving or Christ-like. But it was done legally. The country, any country, if you think about it, what is a country? What's a country? You should know the definition of a country. What is it? Silence. Okay, let me remind you. There's 3 words you can refer to a place as: a country, a nation, or a state. What's a country? What? A place, a geographic place. You can pinpoint on a map, right? And most maps, they're color-coded to tell you that that's the country, that's the borders, right? So if you have a country and it's got borders, doesn't there have to be some difference between if you're in the country or out of the country? Doesn't it, put it this way, if a piece of land doesn't have borders, is it a country? Yes or no? It could still be a nation, it could still be a group of people. Remember, nation's the people, country's the geographic borders of the place, and a state is how it's governed, it's the government. So can you literally have a country if you don't have a border? So that's the issue in present day 21st century America. When the immigrants were coming from Europe, all over Europe, we knew who was coming in. We kept track of their names. We knew, get this, in the middle of a pandemic, we knew if they had diseases or not. Would it be wise to let disease into your country? So they went to this place called Ellis Island. Please don't be
Loudoun County, in 2020, over 220,000 of us did our civic duty and voted. Together, we changed our country. Now we're all doing it again and voting for Democrats like never before. Make your voice heard today. An estimated 40% of Americans are descendants of immigrants that pass through Ellis Island. That's a lot of Americans. The first Ellis Island immigration station opened on January 1st, 1892 in New York Harbor to manage the increasing number of migrants coming to America. In that first year, a record number of nearly 450,000 people passed through to enter the United States. By the time Ellis Island closed in 1954, that number had reached 12 million, although most of those people arrived by 1924. Migrants fleeing poverty, persecution, or just looking to start a new life traveled by private steamship from eastern and southern Europe. Voyages could take 1 to 2 weeks. Ships divided passengers by wealth and class. First and second class passengers slept in staterooms and cabins, while everyone else stayed in the space at the bottom of the ship called the steerage. Steerage passengers paid around $30 per ticket, but steamship companies would sell.
It's kind of the antithesis of this week's chapel message, isn't it? Did I use too big a word? It's kind of the antithesis of this week's chapel message, right, Caleb? I know, because you're not there right now and put me on the spot. What was the chapel message this week? Not to show what? Starts with a P. Anybody? Yeah? What is it? Prejudice or partiality, right? kind of antithesis of that is, hey, you people that don't have much money, you just go down into the bottom of the ship in the steerage. And by the way, what she's about to say is, we won't really count on it. I mean, we'll just sell as many tickets as we can and just pack you all in there. But you people that have money, you got to pay more, but you'll stay in stateroom.
Sell as many tickets as they could. First and second class passengers paid even more. Because of this, steerage was often overcrowded and unsanitary, with shared sleeping compartments and no privacy. But hopeful immigrants stuck it out, believing it was worth it for a chance to live in the United States. When ships finally arrived in New York Harbor, health officers boarded and looked for signs of disease before anyone was allowed to disembark. Healthy first and second class passengers were processed on the spot and allowed to enter the United States without setting foot on Ellis Island. Everyone else waited, sometimes for days, for small ferries to take them to the immigration station for processing. Migrants walked down the gangplank with all of their belongings and dropped their bags in the baggage room on the ground floor. They then continued up a winding staircase to the registry room, which was upstairs for a reason. Doctors stood on the second floor and watched each person climb the stairs for signs of health problems. The registry room, nearly 20,000 square feet with 56-foot tall vaulted ceilings, was nicknamed the Great Hall for its size. It was here that most migrants' fate was decided. The first step to entry was a 6-second physical exam by a uniformed doctor. Anyone considered a risk to public health was marked with a piece of chalk and taken out of the line to be examined further. Marks were given for everything from signs of mental illness to trachoma, a contagious eye infection that could eventually blind up to 3/4 of those infected. Those who cleared the medical exam went on to a legal inspection. Passengers were checked against a manifest from the ship they arrived on and asked 29 identifying questions, often with the help of an interpreter. If their answers didn't match the information on the manifest, things like their name, occupation, and country of origin, they could be detained. The legal interviews could take as little as 2 minutes, and the vast majority of people passed through it.
That ticket they just showed, registry, did anybody of you that did Mr. Lamb's project see anything like that in your ancestry?
Yes.
These and were allowed to enter the country after being issued landing cards with their name, often misspelled, and destination. For others, the stamp.
Does anybody know, is anybody's situation where you learned about your ancestry and know that your name is spelled differently than it was 100 years ago? What was yours?
It was Schiller.
Schiller? They changed it to Schiller?
Yeah.
Or just because they misspelled it?
They misspelled it.
Yeah, like they just said. Like, they said Schiller, the person thought, or they said Schiller, the person thought they said Schiller, or they spelled it with an E instead of an I. Anybody else? Yeah.
I think ours was L-E-Y, like L-I-G-C-L-E-Y.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Just misspelled.
On Ellis Island was considerably longer. The few who were detained for either medical or legal reasons could be on the island overnight or for months. Once their records were finally reviewed, they would either be admitted to the U.S. or sent back to the country they came from, free of charge. But only 2% of the 12 million immigrants processed at Ellis Island were deported in this way. After inspection, everyone continued down a staircase with 3 aisles. Those being detained walked down the center aisle, those entering New York City or headed north walked down the left, and those traveling west or south walked down the right. At the bottom was a post office, a rail ticket office, and a place to change money. For some, family waiting to greet them, and for all, a new life in America.
Yay.
You did not sound very enthusiastic right there.
And that's the story of some of our great-grandparents. Actually, my son just found more information about my great, I think my 3rd or 4th great grandmother, grandfather.
My mom.
Where'd you guys go?
Immigration.
I imagine they're doing so much.
That's why.
It really does.
So he's in charge.
He's Japanese.
And my dad's.
Dude, I'm not lying, I was crying when David was
My dad's side was in the hit.
Alright, that's urbanization. The explosion of city life brought on by Americans migrating north to work, to live in cities. The allure of the cities, the jobs, the city life, and then you had this explosion also in immigration. Largely from what part of the world? South and Eastern Europe, not just English and Germans. Well, it's also at this time in history that this infects America. Darwinian evolution. If you remember your world history, you know that this is a time, after the Renaissance and the changes that came there to Europe, and then right about the time of the founding of America, there was a period called the Enlightenment. And the period called the Enlightenment, why it was called that, is because people were being enlightened or awakened or woke, I guess. Maybe it was like that generation's wokeness that, whoa, we can fix all of humanity's ills. It was a walking away from the dependence on God and realizing how God is sovereign over all the earth, and this idea that man can figure it all out on his own. And some people would say that people like Carnegie and Rockefeller obviously bought into this idea, because part of the Darwinian theory of evolution is this idea of survival of the fittest. Hey, if I'm doing well in business and you're not, it's not my problem. Get better. Step up your game. Some of you thought that, or when we were talking about the captains of industry, that, hey, no matter, that's their business, they can do what they want. It doesn't matter how many people they take advantage of. Even if they didn't take advantage of them and they're accused of taking advantage of them, it's okay if they're accused, because they worked hard for it. That's what they should do. And if you want to compete with them, step up your game, get better. Survival of the fittest. That kind of mentality came from Darwinian evolution. Liberal theologians started to accept the idea, because listen, you'll learn this. We talked about this a lot in UTT. No one wants to be considered not intelligent. The problem that happens with a lot of young people, even you, that you're taught by your parents and your school, and you have this worldview, and you go to college, and a lot of kids unfortunately fall prey, victim, because they don't put on the armor every day, and they fall prey to this anti-Christian ideology, this quote-unquote intellectualism, because why do you believe what you believe? And if you're not firmly entrenched in why you believe what you believe, then you're going to be easy pickings for them. Because they're going to make you feel like then you're not very smart because you're not seeing what they see. So this came into people's churches. Pastors were like, oh yeah, that must be true. Because let me tell you, they can teach evolution and make it seem like if you don't believe it, then you don't even believe 2 + 2 is 4. Don't you think there's certain things that I could come in here? How many think that, let's pretend there's something you never heard of. Don't you think I could come in and present it to you as absolute fact, and most of you would buy into it? Is that true or not? Don't you think that could easily happen?
Because I trust you.
Okay, and when you go to college, that person, that man or woman in front of that's at the lectern and has all that information and is basically kind of in charge of your grade, which is going to have to do with your future. You're going to think they have all the answers for one, right? They're college professors. So you're going to be already leaning towards that must be correct. wait, that's not what I learned in school or church or my house. That's not what my parents or my high school teacher at Heartland taught, but, well, maybe they didn't, maybe those teachers didn't know. These are the college professors. They must know more. Nina said, nope, not gonna happen to her. Human ills can be solved by human reasoning. All the progress that's going to happen here in the world because, hey, we can figure this out. We are the top of the food chain with rational thought and reason. We can work through all the problems of the world and make incredible progress. Come join the progressive movement. I got it in quotes. We're still dealing with the effects of the progressive movement, and we're still dealing with people that are buying into the progressive movement 100 some years later, and that's really what the battle is right now in America. For those of your parents, and you're wondering why they are so, they think about politics, they talk about politics, and they seem to be so strongly on one side of the issue because there's half the country so strongly on that side of the issue. And really, when you boil all of it down, you can take all these different smaller issues, and when you boil it all down, it comes down to you're either for American heritage based on the biblical heritage that we've been given by our founding fathers and this idea that our rights come from God himself, or you're against the whole idea of American heritage, and you're definitely against biblical heritage. If you take all the issues, they can be traced back to that origin. What side do you want? Why is America so divided today? It almost has to be divided. Listen, if it's not divided, that means what? You're agreeing with them? And on the other side, they're like, what? You're agreeing with those Christians? That's what it's kind of been made into. The problem is they own and control all the major ways of getting information out. They've infiltrated the schools. The anti-Christian, anti-American ideology is being taught profusely in public schools. They own media. So all the news stations, all of the social media, they own those too. They go into government. They own Hollywood. They own entertainment. They own Fifth Avenue. If you don't know what that means, Fifth Avenue is the street in New York City where like all the advertising places are, corporations. So all the advertising, all the movies, the music industry, on top of the government and the colleges and the media. It's a wonder we ever win, isn't it? When I say we Christians that love American heritage, it's a wonder we ever win with everything we're up against. Glory. This is where it's going to get scary, because in second period, I almost fell over. Literary style changes. There's a new style of literature called realism that's going to be very popular instead of romanticism. First of all, I got to let CB know that I don't mean romanticism like smoochy love books. Romanticism is a style of writing that's like, it tries to make everything look good. You know what I mean? Like, don't think romantic like lovey-dovey, but like it's a everything's like painted, the picture is painted rosy. Does that make sense? Realism is, hey, this is how life really is. So you get books like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and when I said those names, half the class did not know who Mark Twain was and did not know of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. I almost fainted, Mrs. Tosh. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You don't know who first Mark Twain is. Okay, I can get that maybe, the author of the books. How many people in here never heard of Mark Twain or Huckleberry Finn? Don't be shy. You're in good company. A lot of people. Okay, only a couple in this class. These are like really famous. This is like one of the most prolific authors before the 20th century. And these two guys, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of, oh my goodness. I couldn't believe that. Listen, I'm more of a essay, article type reader. I don't get into novels. I read those when I was a kid. Like, I wasn't even a reader. I either read sports stuff but I read this. You should read it. Some schools it's banned. I can't read Huckleberry Finn because sometimes it likes to cuss. And they're based on life in the South along the Mississippi River, so there's gonna be the N word. We covered that in 5th grade. That's not a word we use, of course, but that's a word that was used a lot back then. That's the reality of it, right? Realism. I think he smokes. He smokes cigarettes. But of course, just because you read about it in the book doesn't mean you're gonna do it, right, Caleb? Just like you know chewing gum's not allowed in school, but you're gonna chew gum.
Did you read that in the book? Did you?
Stephen Crane, how many have heard of this book, Red Badge of Courage? All right.
Yeah.
Call of the Wild?
Oh.
Wait,
Wait, was that the one that they made a movie on lately?
Whoa, there's no way that's about.
Yeah, we did get like
Shnikes.
reading notes.
Actually, all 3 of those schools said in that year.
wow, Ben, what a second.
Test is still Wednesday. We'll finish up crossword on Monday.
Oh,
Yeah.
This guy goes, it was just called play design.
What?
And then when Dernis scored, everyone was like Nick Chubb too.
People are really weird.